After years of surviving on instant noodles, working double shifts, and saving every spare dollar, I finally bought the one thing I once believed I would never have: peace. My beach house sat along a quiet stretch of the Oregon coastline, where the air smelled of salt and cedar, and the steady rhythm of waves replaced the noise of city traffic and old memories. It wasn't a mansion. The paint was still fresh, the furniture mismatched, and the deck slightly uneven in places. But the floor-to-ceiling windows opened to endless blue water, and in the early mornings, sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors like liquid gold. For the first time in my life, every inch of the space belonged to me, not to expectations, not to control, not to anyone else's approval. I hadn't told my parents. We hadn't truly spoken in years. Growing up, they had mapped out my entire future before I could even understand what choice meant. I was expected to join the family business, marry within their social circle, and live within the narrow boundaries they called success. When I chose architecture instead, when I chose myself, they cut financial support and told relatives I was going through a rebellious phase. That phase lasted a decade. So when my phone rang on a gray Tuesday morning and my mother's name flashed across the screen, a familiar knot tightened in my stomach. I let it ring twice before answering. "I heard you bought a beach house," she said, skipping any greeting. My fingers tightened around the phone.
Who told you that?
"That isn't important," she replied coolly. "What matters is family. Your father, and I deserve to enjoy it."
Deserve.
Not congratulations. Not we're proud of you. Just entitlement wrapped in the language of sacrifice. Before I could respond, I heard my father's voice in the background, loud and authoritative as always. "Tell her we'll arrive this weekend. She should prepare the master bedroom." My chest tightened as I stared out the window. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, calm and indifferent, as if reminding me how small human demands truly were. "They can't just show up," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "This is my home." My mother sighed, the sound heavy with practiced disappointment. "Don't start being selfish. We sacrificed everything for you." The words landed like stones, familiar, rehearsed, sharpened by years of repetition. The call ended before I could answer. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the waves crash against the shore below. 6 years had passed since they last visited me. 6 years of silence, distance, and rebuilding myself from the fragments they left behind. And now they were coming. Not to reconnect, not to reconcile, but to claim a place in the life they had never supported. Something inside me shifted as the tide rolled in. If they were coming, they would not receive the welcome they expected. They would receive the truth. The ocean was calm that evening, but my mind was anything but. I stood barefoot on the damp sand, letting the cold water rush over my feet and retreat again, as if the tide were breathing. The horizon glowed in streaks of orange and violet while gulls cried overhead, their echoes fading into the wind. This place was supposed to be my fresh start, a life built without criticism, without control, without the constant weight of never being enough. Yet one phone call had dragged the past back onto shore. I hadn't thought about my childhood in years. Not really. I had packed it away the same way I packed boxes when I moved into my first tiny apartment, quickly, efficiently, without looking inside. But memories have a way of resurfacing when the tide shifts. I remembered my 10th birthday, sitting at the kitchen table beside an untouched cake while my parents attended a business dinner they said was more important. I told my classmates the next day that we celebrated late because we were busy. Even then, I protected them. I remembered winning the regional science fair in 8th grade. Other kids posed with their parents for photos while I held my certificate alone, smiling too wide so no one would ask questions. I remember the day my father told a room full of relatives, "She's talented, but she lacks discipline," after I announced I wanted to study architecture instead of finance. Everyone nodded like it was a diagnosis. The sharpest memory came from my college graduation. I scanned the crowded auditorium for familiar faces as names were called, and applause erupted around me. My phone stayed silent. My seat remained empty of flowers. When the ceremony ended, I walked back to my dorm carrying my diploma and an ache I refused to name. I built my life alone after that. 2 jobs turned into 3. Drafting internships turned into overnight design work. I learned to repair leaky sinks, negotiate contracts, and assemble furniture without help. Every achievement felt quieter, without family to share it with, but also freer. Now, they wanted to enjoy the result. A bitter laugh escaped me as I walked back toward the house. The porch light glowed warmly, illuminating the driftwood railing I had sanded myself. Inside, the scent of fresh paint and sea air mingled with the faint aroma of coffee from that morning. This home wasn't a gift. It was earned. I sat at the kitchen counter and opened my laptop, the screen's glow reflecting in the dark windows. If my parents were coming to claim comfort they hadn't helped create, they would first have to face the reality they had ignored. Not revenge. Not cruelty.
Truth.
I began making a list. Photos stored in old folders. Dates I never forgot. Moments that shaped the person they barely knew. Outside, the tide rolled steadily inward, each wave closer than the last. By the time I closed the laptop, the plan was set. If they wanted to stay in my home, they would finally see the life I built without them and the cost of their absence. For the first time since the call, my chest felt lighter. The past was coming with them. But this time I was ready. Saturday morning arrived wrapped in a gray coastal mist, the kind that blurred the line between ocean and sky. The air smelled of salt and wet cedar, and the steady rhythm of waves against the shore echoed through the stillness. I had been awake since dawn, not out of excitement, but because sleep refused to come. They were coming. I stood at the kitchen window holding a mug of untouched coffee, watching the long gravel driveway disappear into the fog. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, calm on the surface, but tight around the eyes. I had spent years preparing presentations for demanding clients, negotiating contracts under pressure, and defending my designs in boardrooms full of skeptics. None of that made my parents' visit feel easier. At 9:17 a.m., headlights pierced through the mist. A black luxury SUV rolled slowly toward the house, tires crunching over gravel like a declaration of ownership. It stopped near the porch, as if it had parked there 100 times before. I exhaled slowly and stepped outside. The driver's door opened first. My father emerged, tall and rigid, dressed in pressed slacks and a wool coat that looked too formal for the coast. He glanced at the house briefly, not with admiration, but with evaluation, like a man inspecting an investment. The passenger door opened next. My mother stepped out wearing oversized sunglasses and a silk scarf wrapped neatly around her neck, as though the wind itself required elegance. She paused, scanning the property from the deck to the shoreline. "Well," she said, removing her glasses, "it's smaller than I expected." No hello. No hug. Just judgment carried on the ocean breeze. My father opened the back door and removed 2 expensive suitcases. He walked past me with only the faintest nod, already heading toward the entrance. "Which room is ours?" he asked, as if checking into a hotel. I watched him climb the porch steps he hadn't helped build, past the railing I had sanded with blistered hands, toward the door I had painted myself. "It's good to see you too," I replied evenly. My mother gave me a brief, air-light embrace, her cheek brushing mine without warmth. "We drove 5 hours," she said. "Traffic was exhausting." I nodded. "You should come inside." My father was already trying the door handle. "It's open," I said. He stepped into the living room and stopped, his eyes moving slowly across the open space, the high ceilings, ocean-facing windows, simple furniture, and driftwood accents. Sunlight filtered through the clouds, reflecting off the water and sending shifting patterns of light across the walls. My mother followed, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. She ran her finger along the windowsill. "You should hire better cleaners," she murmured. I closed the door behind them, the sound of the latch clicking louder than it should have. 6 years. 6 years of silence, distance, and rebuilding myself. And now they stood in the center of my life, critiquing it. My father turned toward me. "We'll need the master bedroom," he said. "Your mother prefers a firm mattress." I studied their faces, the certainty, the entitlement, the complete absence of curiosity about who I had become. A calm smile spread across my face. "Oh," I said gently, "I've prepared something special for you." Outside, the fog began to lift. Inside, the past stood waiting at the door I was finally ready to open. I gestured toward the wide living room windows where the ocean stretched endlessly beyond the glass. Morning light shimmered across the water, sending soft reflections dancing along the ceiling. For a moment, the house felt peaceful again, like it did before the sound of gravel under tires announced their arrival. "This is the main living area," I said calmly. My father walked slowly across the hardwood floor, testing each step as though he expected it to creak under his weight. He paused near the windows, not to admire the view, but to inspect the frame. "Custom?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded once. "Expensive?" My mother drifted toward the open kitchen, her eyes scanning the marble countertops and floating shelves. She opened a cabinet, then another, as if evaluating storage rather than appreciating the space. "You didn't choose white cabinets," she noted. "White would make it look larger." I folded my hands loosely in front of me. "I like warm tones." She hummed in disapproval. I led them toward the dining area, where a solid oak table sat beneath a woven light fixture. I had found the table secondhand and restored it myself, sanding and staining it over several late nights. My father ran his thumb along the edge. "This is used." "I restored it," I said. He shrugged. "New would have been better." The words landed softly, but they landed. We continued toward the back deck. When I slid open the glass doors, the sound of waves filled the air instantly, steady and soothing. The breeze lifted my mother's scarf as she stepped outside. The coastline stretched in both directions, untouched and quiet. Far below, foam curled around dark rocks before retreating back into the sea. My mother placed a hand on the railing and looked outward. "At least the view is acceptable." I watched the horizon instead of responding. My father leaned against the railing, squinting toward the water. "Does it flood during storms?"
No.
"Insurance must be high." "Not beautiful. Not peaceful. Just risk assessment." We stepped back inside. I showed them the reading loft tucked above the living room, the guest bathroom with sea glass tiles, and the small workspace where I drafted designs late into the night. They nodded politely, but their eyes never softened with pride or recognition. When we reached the hallway leading to the bedrooms, my mother spoke. "I assume the master suite is at the end?" Her tone carried expectation, not question. I paused deliberately. The master bedroom sat exactly where she imagined it, spacious, filled with sunlight, and opening to a private view of the shoreline. It was the one room in the house I had designed entirely for myself, down to the linen textures and hand-woven rug. But I did not open that door. Instead, I turned to the smaller guest room across the hall. "Yes," I said, resting my hand on the knob. "I've prepared your room." My father frowned slightly. "Your room?" I met his gaze, calm and steady. "I wanted you to feel comfortable," I replied. I opened the door. Inside were two twin beds with simple cotton sheets, a wooden dresser, and soft lamplight warming the pale walls. But what filled the room, what truly defined it, were the framed photographs arranged carefully around the space. My mother stepped inside first.
She stopped.
My father followed. Silence fell heavily between us as the ocean roared faintly in the distance. "This," my mother said slowly, "is not the master bedroom." "No," I answered quietly. "It's something more important." My mother remained motionless in the doorway, her hand still resting on the frame, as though stepping fully into the room required permission she wasn't prepared to give. My father moved past her slowly, his polished shoes quiet against the wooden floor. The ocean's distant rhythm filled the silence they left behind. At first glance, the room looked simple, almost modest. Twin beds stood neatly made with crisp cotton sheets and folded blankets at the foot. A small dresser rested beneath the window, where pale morning light filtered through sheer curtains. A ceramic lamp cast a soft, warm glow against the walls. But it wasn't the furniture that held their attention. It was the photographs. Framed images covered the walls with deliberate spacing, each one carefully chosen and positioned at eye level. Some were small snapshots. Others were enlarged prints, their details impossible to ignore. My mother stepped closer to the first frame. A school gymnasium. Folding chairs. Children in bright ribbons and medals. At the center stood a younger version of me holding a blue trophy, smiling stiffly at the camera. 2 empty chairs sat behind me. Beneath the photo, a small caption read, "Regional Science Fair winner. Parents did not attend." Her fingers tightened around the strap of her purse. My father's gaze shifted to the next frame. A high school auditorium stage. Students in graduation gowns. Families clustered together in celebration. I stood alone near the edge of the stage, diploma in hand. Honor graduate, celebrated alone. The air in the room seemed to thicken. They moved slowly from frame to frame. A college awards ceremony. Architecture scholarship recipient. No family present. A tiny apartment with unpacked boxes. First home. Built without help. A photo of me holding a rolled set of blueprints, standing beside a half-finished structure. First design contract. Earned at 23. My mother exhaled unsteadily. "Why would you put these here?" I leaned against the doorframe, my voice steady but quiet. "Because this is the room I prepared for you." My father's jaw tightened. He studied a final photograph near the window. It showed a younger me sitting on a dorm bed, holding a phone, eyes swollen from crying. The timestamp glowed in the corner. Graduation day, no calls received. The ocean crashed against the rocks below, louder now, as if the tide itself had drawn closer to listen. "This is unnecessary," my father said, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. "Is it?" I asked. My mother turned toward me, her expression caught somewhere between defensiveness and something more fragile. "We provided for you. We worked constantly, so you could have opportunities." "I know," I said gently, "but you weren't there." The words did not rise in anger. They landed softly, carrying years of silence rather than accusation. Neither of them spoke. The photographs remained, quiet witnesses to moments long dismissed, minimized, or forgotten. "This isn't punishment," I continued. "It's context." My father looked around the room once more, slower this time, as though seeing not images but time itself, years he had measured in financial statements and expectations rather than presence. My mother lowered herself onto the edge of one twin bed. The mattress dipped slightly beneath her weight, and for the first time since arriving, she looked unsure of where she belonged. Outside, the tide surged forward, then retreated. Inside, the past no longer waited in silence. It had finally been seen. Silence settled over the room like a heavy curtain. No one moved. Even the ocean, though still roaring beyond the cliffs, seemed distant, as if the world outside had stepped back to let the truth inside the room breathe. My father stood near the window, his hands clasped behind his back in the rigid posture he had used my entire childhood. It was the stance of authority, of control, of certainty. But now there was hesitation in the way his shoulders sagged ever so slightly. My mother remained seated on the edge of the twin bed, staring at the photographs as if they might rearrange themselves into something easier to accept. "They are only pictures," she said quietly, though her voice lacked conviction. "They are moments," I replied. The lamp beside her cast a warm glow across the wall, illuminating another frame she hadn't yet noticed. It showed a middle school stage, children performing in paper costumes under bright lights. In the center, I stood dressed as a tree, my arms raised awkwardly, eyes scanning the audience. "Spring play. Looked for you in every row." My mother's hand rose slowly to her mouth. "I didn't know," she whispered. I tilted my head slightly. "You never asked." My father turned away from the window and approached the far wall. His gaze settled on a photo taken outside a small, weathered building, my first architecture internship. I stood in borrowed heels and a blazer 2 sizes too big, clutching a portfolio case. "Unpaid internship. Took night shifts to survive." His brow furrowed. "You never told us you were struggling," he said. I tried, I answered. But every conversation became a lecture about coming back to the family business. He didn't deny it. The ocean wind rattled faintly against the glass, and somewhere in the distance a gull cried sharply before fading into the gray sky. My mother's eyes moved to a photograph near the dresser. It showed a cracked kitchen sink in my first apartment, water pooled beneath it, tools scattered around. First repair, learned because no one came. Her shoulders trembled slightly. "We thought giving you independence would make you strong," she said. "It did," I replied softly. "But strength and loneliness are not the same." The words lingered in the air. My father exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple as if absorbing a truth he had never made time to consider. He looked again at the photographs, but this time his expression was different, less defensive, more searching. For years, these moments had existed only in my memory. Quiet victories, private heartbreaks, milestones passed without witnesses. They were never dramatic enough to confront, never urgent enough to demand attention. They had simply accumulated, layer upon layer, shaping the person standing before them now. And for the first time, my parents were seeing them, not as stories, as evidence. "This house," my father began, his voice lower than I had ever heard it. "You built this life without us." I nodded. I had to. My mother looked up at me, her eyes glassy but steady. "We thought you pushed us away." "I stopped chasing people who weren't coming," I said. No anger. No raised voices. Just truth, spoken years later than it should have been. Outside, a wave crashed violently against the rocks below, sending white spray into the air before retreating once more. Inside, the walls no longer displayed photographs. They spoke. And, at last, someone was listening. By the time evening settled over the coastline, the sky had darkened into deep shades of blue and silver. Clouds rolled slowly above the water, heavy but undecided, while the steady rhythm of waves continued below the cliffs. Inside the house, a quiet tension lingered. Not sharp, not explosive, but fragile. I moved around the kitchen calmly, seasoning the fish I had bought that morning from a small dockside market. The scent of garlic and lemon filled the air as olive oil sizzled softly in the pan. I sliced fresh bread and arranged a simple salad beside it. Nothing extravagant. Nothing performative. Just dinner. My parents sat at the dining table, the restored oak table my father had criticized earlier. They spoke little. My mother traced the grain of the wood with her fingertips, as though noticing it properly for the first time. My father stared out toward the darkening ocean through the wide windows. When I carried the plates over and set them down, neither of them commented on the presentation or cost. We began eating in silence. The only sounds were forks against ceramic and the distant crash of waves. Finally, my mother set her fork down. "Are you trying to punish us?" she asked, her voice softer than before. I met her eyes steadily.
No.
"Then why bring up everything from the past?" my father added, though his tone lacked its usual edge. I folded my napkin neatly beside my plate. "Because you arrived expecting comfort. I needed you to understand what it cost." My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "You see this house," I continued, gesturing gently around the room. "The view, the stability, the quiet. It didn't come from nowhere. It came from years of figuring things out alone." My mother's gaze dropped to her plate. "We thought pushing you would prepare you for the real world," she said. "You pushed," I agreed. "But you never showed up." The words hung between us, not shouted, not sharp, just honest. My father leaned back in his chair. "We worked constantly. Everything we did was for the family." "I understand that," I said. "But being provided for is not the same as being present." The wind outside picked up slightly, brushing against the windows like restless fingers. My mother swallowed hard. "We didn't know you felt abandoned." "I didn't know how to say it in a way you would hear," I replied. Silence returned, but it felt different now, less defensive, more reflective. For years, conversations between us had been battles of authority and expectation. Tonight felt unfamiliar. There were no raised voices, no threats of withdrawal, Just a table, 3 plates, and truths that had waited too long. My father looked down at his hands. "When you stopped calling," he said quietly, "I thought you were ashamed of us." A faint, almost disbelieving breath escaped me. I stopped calling because every conversation made me feel like I wasn't enough. My mother's eyes glistened under the soft light fixture above the table. The ocean roared louder for a moment, then softened again, as though echoing the rise and fall of our voices. No one reached for dessert. No one criticized the meal. For the first time in my life, we were not discussing achievements, money, or reputation. We were discussing absence. And though it hurt, it felt necessary. Outside, the tide crept closer to shore. Inside, something long buried was finally breaking the surface. That night, the weather seemed to mirror the tension inside the house. Heavy clouds rolled across the sky, thick and low, while gusts of wind rattled the windows and sent the ocean into a wild frenzy. Waves crashed against the jagged rocks below, white foam flying upward like shards of shattered glass. I sat on the porch, wrapped in a soft blanket, listening to the storm gather strength, and tried to steady my racing thoughts. My parents had retreated to their room, still quiet, still processing. The photographs, the words, the meals, everything I had laid out for them to understand who I was and what it had cost me, had stirred something inside. A mixture of regret, unease, and maybe, for the first time, self-awareness. The rain began as a fine drizzle, then intensified into a torrent, hammering against the roof and porch. Lightning split the sky in jagged lines, briefly illuminating the waves that battered the shoreline below. And yet, despite the chaos, the storm felt fitting. It was as though the universe itself had decided to cleanse the tension, to force the reckoning I had long anticipated. I noticed my mother standing at the edge of the porch, her scarf whipping around her face, eyes locked on the dark horizon. She didn't speak, but the tilt of her head betrayed her struggle. Finally, she broke the silence. "We thought pushing you made you stronger," she said, her voice trembling over the roar of wind and surf. I kept my gaze on the storm, not turning toward her immediately. "It did," I said softly. "But strength and loneliness are not the same thing." She nodded slowly, as if hearing something she had never allowed herself to understand. Behind her, the ocean raged, relentless and unforgiving, yet somehow, still beautiful. It reminded me of everything I had endured and everything I had built despite their absence. My father appeared beside her, silent, his hands in his pockets. He had always carried himself with the weight of authority, but tonight, that weight seemed uncertain. His eyes, usually fixed on judgment and expectation, reflected only the storm's fury and a trace of recognition of the years lost and the resilience I had forged alone. For a long while, none of us spoke. The storm spoke for us instead. It roared, it cracked, it reminded us of power and consequence. The ocean beyond mirrored the turbulence within our own hearts. I finally turned to face them. "You came expecting to take comfort," I said quietly. "Instead, you found reality. I hope you understand now what it costs to build this life without you." My mother's lips trembled. "We never realized," she began, but no further words came. The wind drowned them. I took a deep breath, feeling the storm press against my chest and the truth I had held for so long finally breaking free. In that moment, I realized that this storm was not just weather, it was a reckoning. And like all storms, it would pass, leaving clarity in its wake. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the waves, the rocks, and our 3 small figures on the porch. In the distance, I could hear the faint rhythm of the tide, slower now, retreating, a reminder that even chaos eventually gives way to calm. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that tomorrow, things would be different. The storm had broken, and with it, the walls that had kept us apart for so many years. Tonight, we began to see one another clearly. The storm passed by dawn, leaving behind a sky washed in pale gold and soft lavender streaks. The ocean, which had raged violently the night before, now lapped gently at the shoreline, calm and rhythmic, as if nothing had ever disturbed its surface. The air smelled of salt, wet sand, and renewal, the kind of freshness that only comes after chaos. I stepped onto the porch barefoot, feeling the sand cool beneath my feet, and let the sun's early warmth slowly touch my skin. Inside, the house was quiet. My parents were still in the guest room, likely asleep, though after yesterday's confrontation, sleep was probably restless and uneasy. The living room carried the faint scent of leftover breakfast, coffee cooling in mugs I had forgotten to clean. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as though the tension of the previous day had settled into understanding. I poured myself a cup of coffee and walked toward the deck. From this vantage point, the coastline stretched endlessly, the cliffs glistening with the remnants of last night's storm. I took a deep breath, letting the sea air fill my lungs, and reflected on everything that had happened. My parents had arrived expecting comfort, entitlement, perhaps even obedience. Instead, they found truth. Photographs on the walls, memories carefully framed, had spoken louder than any words I could have said. The meals I had prepared, the rooms I had designated, even the calm firmness in my voice, all of it had forced them to confront a reality they had long ignored. I heard movement behind me and turned. My father approached, his hands tucked into his pockets, expression unreadable but softer than I had ever seen. He paused at the edge of the deck, looking out at the horizon, then back at me. "I didn't know how to be the father you needed," he said quietly, almost to himself. His voice carried no pride, no anger, just honesty. I met his gaze steadily. "You can't change the past," I said, "but you can see what it cost." He nodded slowly. "I see it now." My mother appeared beside him, her scarf absent, her hair damp from a shower I hadn't heard her take. She hesitated, then placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. "We're proud of you," she whispered. It wasn't the usual, rehearsed kind of pride. It was fragile, human, and real. For a moment, we stood there together, the sound of gentle waves below our feet, the sunlight spilling across the porch, and the house we all occupied silently recognizing the truth. No one claimed the master bedroom. No one demanded comfort. Instead, there was acknowledgement of absence, of struggle, and of resilience. The ocean stretched endlessly, a mirror to the future ahead. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to hope for. Possibility. Not just for me, but for all of us. As they turned to leave that morning, my parents carried with them something more than luggage. They carried understanding. And I carried the knowledge that the life I had built, every late night, every lonely moment, every victory won in silence, was mine. Fully mine. The SUV disappeared down the winding coastal road, leaving only the sound of waves and the promise of tomorrow. I stood barefoot in the sand, watching, letting the wind play through my hair. They had arrived expecting entitlement. They left with clarity. And my beach house, my sanctuary, remained exactly what it was always meant to be: a home, a haven, and a testament to the life I had claimed for myself. The morning air was crisp and salty, carrying the faint scent of seaweed and driftwood as the sun rose fully over the horizon. Golden rays painted the waves in brilliant streaks of light, and the world seemed to hold its breath, still recovering from the storm that had raged the night before. I walked barefoot along the edge of the porch, feeling the sand cling to my toes, listening to the gentle rhythm of the ocean. Everything felt quiet, reflective, and strangely hopeful. Inside, the house was peaceful. The guest room where my parents had stayed was tidy, though signs of their presence lingered. A silk scarf draped over a chair, a half-empty water glass on the nightstand. No grand gestures, no attempts at rearranging my space to suit their tastes. For the first time, I realized that perhaps they had understood something about me, about the life I had built, and about the boundaries they could no longer cross. I heard the soft creak of the front door opening. My parents were leaving. They had packed lightly, no longer trying to claim a part of my life or my home. My mother came out first, her expression softer, almost vulnerable. She gave me a brief hug, hesitant yet genuine. "Thank you for showing us," she said, her voice low and almost choked. I think I understand now." My father followed, adjusting the straps of his bag. He hesitated at the threshold, looking around the living room one last time. For years, he had measured success in numbers, contracts, and appearances, but now his eyes lingered on details that mattered. The sunlight spilling across the floors, the handcrafted furniture, the careful design choices that reflected me, not him. "I see what you built," he said quietly, almost to himself. "And I respect it." His words were not loud, not performative. They were steady, honest, and something I had never expected to hear from him. They walked to the SUV waiting at the edge of the driveway. I followed them to the porch, watching their expressions. There were no demands, no entitlement, no expectation that the master bedroom should be theirs. There was simply acknowledgement, an understanding of the years I had spent alone, of the work I had done, and the life I had claimed for myself. The engine started, and the vehicle slowly rolled down the gravel driveway. I waved, and they waved back. My mother's hand lingered briefly on the car door, as if saying goodbye to more than just a building, perhaps to old patterns, old misunderstandings, and the idea that control defined love. As the SUV disappeared around the bend, I stood barefoot in the sand, waves touching my feet, letting the wind carry away the tension of years past. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, calm and infinite, reflecting a sky now washed clean of the storm. I breathed deeply, feeling the weight of the past lift slightly with every exhale. No one had claimed the master bedroom. No one had tried to rewrite the story of my life. They came expecting entitlement, but they left with understanding. And I realized something profound. My beach house was not just a home. It was a sanctuary, a testament, a place where boundaries were respected, and where the life I had fought for, every choice, every lonely night, every small victory, could finally exist fully as mine. I turned back toward the house, smiling softly. The horizon glimmered with promise, and the waves whispered a quiet truth. Freedom isn't just having a home. It's having a life that belongs entirely to you. If you want, I can now write a full cover image prompt for your story and also suggest a female main character name to go with it. It would make your story visually complete and more ready for publishing or sharing. Do you want me to do that next?